Isn't this a glamorous start to my talk? This was the mattress that I was sleeping on 2 years ago. I was renting out my own bedroom on Airbnb to a different stranger every single week. I was working on my own startup, Encore, and I was doing that full-time without a salary. And I was also teaching programming workshops at the weekends. And I was doing all of this to make just enough money to survive in central London while we raised investment for Encore. And I endured this uncomfortable and frugal lifestyle for a few months until we did eventually raise investment for Encore. And today I lead a team of 8 people in London, and Encore is home to nearly 25,000 musicians around the UK. So this was a challenging and uncomfortable period of my life, but it wasn't the first time that I had endured sustained discomfort. And one of the themes today, which I'm really happy to be talking about, is steps into the unknown. And today I want to share with you a few of the leaps into the unknown that I've taken in my life so far, and some of the lessons that I've learned from those. The key idea that I'm going to talk about today is that you should surround yourself with people better than you. I will come back to this again and again in my talk, but if you're to take anything away from this talk, I do believe that being around people who are achieving what you want to achieve and inspiring you is really a fantastic place to be, and it can be uncomfortable, but it is the fastest way to learn. So firstly, as a musician myself, I'm delighted to be speaking to such a musical audience today. My parents met in an orchestra, so I've been surrounded by music pretty much from the moment I was born, and I have always loved music. That's me in the white jumper screaming at a piano for no reason, but trust me, I love music. And when I was 9 years old, I started learning the cello, and pretty quickly I became one of the better musicians in my primary school, and this gave me a lot of pride and satisfaction, and I really enjoyed this position. And so when I was 11, I joined a specialist music school. If anyone's familiar with Chetham's in Manchester, the school I was at was a bit like Chetham's, but it was in Scotland. And almost overnight, I went from being one of the best musicians in my primary school to one of the worst musicians in this music school. And the standard was extremely high. The other children were really advanced. And this was the first time in my life that I had really been truly outside of my comfort zone. And the cello, which had given me pride and satisfaction, was now starting to become this source of frustration. Being surrounded by so many precocious teenagers who are fantastic at their instruments is an uncomfortable and difficult environment to be in when you're 11 or 12 years old. However, this environment also galvanized me. My standards for my own playing were drastically increased, and I really took a lot of inspiration from the people around me, and I worked really hard in order to catch up to them. And eventually, after about 7 years, I went from being one of the worst musicians in this music school to leading the cello section at the BBC Proms with the National Youth Orchestra of Scotland. And I do believe that I would not have made it to the Proms, I wouldn't have made it to this glorious stage if I hadn't been around so many incredible musicians who inspired me and who made me work hard. And I do believe that I got there because of the environment that I was in. So, as Haley mentioned, as well as studying music, I'd become fascinated by computer science. And so I went to Cambridge in 2011 to study computer science. And I knew very little about Cambridge when I applied. My school knew nothing about Cambridge when I applied, so I really had no idea what I was getting myself into. And this was probably the second big leap into the unknown that I'd taken in my life. Within a few days of starting the course, I started to realize that maybe I was out of my depth. I vividly remember a conversation before one of our first lectures, and someone asked, "When did you start programming?" And I think I started when I was 15 or 16, so I said, a couple of years just getting into it. And I will never forget the moment that someone turned around and very smugly said, "I've been programming since I was 5. Who starts programming when they're 5? As a reminder, I was screaming at pianos when I was 5. So it dawned on me that I might be around people who were of a slightly different caliber to me and maybe enjoyed programming slightly more than I did. And so I spent the next 2 years struggling to adapt to this difficult new environment while other people seemed to be thriving and succeeding. And at the end of my second year, my tutor invited me to his office to discuss my remarkable exam results. And they were remarkable because I had placed in the bottom 5% of my year and I'd come dangerously close to failing my entire degree. And my tutor asked me, have you considered moving to a different university? And these words really cut me like a knife. My first 2 years at Cambridge had been an academic car crash. I truly believed everyone there was smarter than I was. And I was out of my comfort zone. In fact, this was probably one of the most uncomfortable conversations of my life. And so in my third year, I didn't leave. And instead of making things easier for myself, I made things harder for myself. I started working in classes with two friends who had done really well in the first 2 years of our course. And at first, working with these people who were on a completely different level to me just reminded me of my own shortcomings. It was pretty frustrating. But as the year went on, I started to adopt some of their habits and their mindsets, and my standards for my own work increased, and I found myself starting to understand more of the content. And the key here is that I had put myself in an environment where success was normal. I'd started benchmarking myself against people who were getting really good grades, and what I perceived to be normal had been redefined by the people around me. This goes back to my original point. I do believe that when you're in an environment with people who are achieving what you want to achieve, they will elevate you and you will achieve more. And so at the end of my third year, I graduated from Cambridge with a respectable mark, much to the relief of my parents. So after I graduated from Cambridge, I joined an accelerator called Entrepreneur First, and this is where I met my business partner, James. And the idea behind Entrepreneur First at the time was really quite simple. You take 50 ambitious individuals, you throw them together for 6 months, and hopefully at the end, you have some successful tech startups. Once again, I was thrown straight into the deep end. Some of these people had PhDs in theoretical computer science. Some of them had started their own businesses before. And I was also the second youngest person on the program at the age of 20. In fact, when we all took a trip to America for a week, I wasn't even old enough to drink alcohol. And this was a sobering reminder of how young I was at the time. However, by this stage in my life, I'd become used to being one of the least experienced people in my group. And in fact, I was starting to thrive in this environment where I was around people who were achieving what I wanted to achieve and really inspiring me. And I learned so much from being around such ambitious people. I spent 6 months working and living exclusively with people who wanted to really change the world and build high-impact companies. And again, what I perceived as normal had been redefined. So at university, it was normal to just graduate and get a graduate job, and that's normal. And now it was normal to start your own business and want to, really make a difference. And I worked harder than I think I've ever have in those 6 months because of the environment I was in, because I was around such incredible people. And getting a company off the ground is not easy. In fact, 90% of businesses fail within their first 18 months. I founded Encore when I was 20, just 4 weeks after I'd left university. I had never run a business before. I'd never raised investment. I'd never led a team. I had never talked to the press. Really, this was the biggest leap into the unknown that I could have taken. However, while most people might spend 5 or 10 years waiting for the right experience and waiting for the right time to start, we started with no prior experience, and we had no choice but to learn as quickly as we could and learn as much as we could if we wanted to survive in the business world. And in fact, Reid Hoffman, the founder of LinkedIn, has this fantastic line where he says that starting a company is like jumping off a cliff and assembling an airplane on the way down. And I think we've managed to assemble an airplane. I love this analogy. I think it applies to any project you start where you have no prior experience. I just think it's fantastic. So this takes me back to 2015 when I'm sleeping on that mattress that you saw at the start of my talk. And I was thinking recently, what kept me going through that period? And I think there are three things really that kept me going in that time. Firstly, as I've said before, the environment I was in. Lots of my friends were moving mountains to keep their companies alive, and they were doing everything possible to survive in the business world. So really, the sacrifice I was making wasn't that out of the ordinary in the context I was in. Secondly, I'd figured out that running and cycling kept me sane, and they helped me sleep when things were stressful. And the more stressed I got, the further I ran or the further I cycled, and this helped me so much. And finally, I'd managed to combine my two biggest passions in life. I'd combined music and I'd combined technology, and I do think that surviving through these difficult periods of your life is so much easier when you truly care about what you're working on and when you love the work you're doing. So before I finish, I just want to take a moment and ask you to think about the environment that you're in and the people that you're around. Are you around people that are challenging you? Are you throwing yourself into unfamiliar situations? Are the people around you inspiring you? Because I do believe that the environment you're in and the company you keep really have such an impact on what you can achieve yourself. So I want to leave with three of the lessons that I have learned so far. Firstly, I really think you should actively seek out people better than yourself. So that might be starting a quartet with 3 musicians that you think are far better than you, or it might be forming a band where everyone can solo better than you, but that is what will help you improve. And this is what I have done. I've constantly put myself into these environments where I've been one of the least experienced people, but I think that's gotten me to where I am today. Secondly, I think it's really important that you figure out what recharges you. This might sound simple, and it might not be music if you're a musician. I found that running and cycling just really helped me when things get tough. And I would encourage you to think hard about what is it that helps you reset and recharge, because it's so crucial. And finally, I think working on projects that you really care about makes it so much easier to survive when the going gets tough. And I cannot stress this enough. There were moments where we had almost no money and it was really getting quite difficult, and people were saying, do you want to keep going? This looks like it might not work. But I love music so much, and I love technology, and I knew that this is what I had to do. So work on things that you care about. When I was asked to do this TEDx talk, in fact, I was tempted just to say no and just avoid taking the risk entirely. I've never done a talk like this before, so this is another leap into the unknown for me. But if past experience has taught me anything, it's that learning as you go and having to think on your feet is one of the most fun ways and most enjoyable ways to live life. And so please do not hesitate to take your own bold steps into the unknown. Thank you very much.